Hi, everybody. All right, we're on the page Intro to Visual Literacy, Reading Content. And this right here, if you're not literate in Mandarin, just looks like a bunch of lines. And even knowing that it says Ni Shi Wen Mang, it says you're illiterate because you can't read it. And in the same way, when you looked at the video that was posted next to the first and last image, it may have looked like a foreign language to you, but you may, after thinking about it, realize that, well, you can recognize the word or the image rainbow or sunset or even a horse if it's pointed out to you. So in art, when we have visual literacy, it helps if you kind of think about it like content. Content is what's in a work of art, just what is there to look at. And like a table of contents, it tells you what's in the idea of the picture, what's in the picture. Context is like reading a word in context. There might be other words around it, so you read the word a little bit differently in a sentence. Or somebody might say the word a little differently, and that puts it in another context. Concept just means idea. What's the big idea of the piece? So when I look at the content, what's in the piece, and I understand the context, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the artist's life, what's going on in art at the time, I'll understand the concept or the idea of the visual literacy. So let's start looking at one that we can really work with. Now on this one, I think you can see the horse, right? This is good if you can see the horse. This one's called Night, Death, and the Devil. And when you look carefully at it, you might immediately decide which is the death and which is the devil, but you do have to go back and forth. I know which one's the night. The knight's the one on the horse. And hint, horse means power. So like underneath the hood of your car is horsepower. With this one, the horse represents some kind of strength, and the knight has strength and armor. So when I look very carefully at death and the devil, there are certain hints. Now, as you're looking at this, you might want to, on your own, enlarge the page because you'll see these little tiny lines. And Albert Durr was about your age when he made this, and it's about the size, it's a little bit smaller than the size of a piece of uh, computer paper. And what he did was he took a copper sheet and he took like a nail and he scratched into the copper sheet little tiny lines. And you can see them if you look up close. And then as he scratched the lines, he would push ink over the entire plate, clean off the plate so where the little grooves were is where some paint would remain, and then you put a sheet of paper on top of it, and when you put a sheet of paper on top of it, then you peel the paper off and you have a print, and that's called an engraving, and you can make many prints off of your copper plate. Well, it's fascinating to think that Albert Durr is not only doing these little scratches, but of course this is way before photography. So he's making this up out of his head. And if he scratches the metal wrong, he has to polish the whole thing off and start over again. So the knight's head is about the size of your thumbnail. The dog you'll see is about the size of, is smaller than your thumb, okay? So when you look, did you decide? Because at first I can understand you thinking that this guy might be the devil because he looks kind of horned and awful, but he's got an hourglass. And so you might have noticed, oh, hourglass means time, right? And when I look here, this is the worms crawling in and out of this guy's skeleton face. And this horned goat-like being is, of course, then the devil. So when you look at it, Durr puts the devil back here. Now you could say that the devil is a horse's butt, But the devil could have been placed anywhere, and it's definitely at this very is a horse's butt kind of placement. But also, you might have heard the phrase, Satan, get thee behind me. Well, so here this knight has Satan getting behind him. Now, this is a Catholic Christian piece. So I know that the knight is a Christian knight. And I know that this is the armor of God, that the Christian knight marches into battle with a direct kind of power and puts Satan behind him. Now, I also see that death has a horse. And so a horse means power. And so that's the power of death when your time comes. And when you look at these next details, this is Albrecht Dürer's gravestone. So this is how they used to like mark graves back in the 1513s. And so he's put the date and his signature on his gravestone. And this is his skull that has fallen off of his head and rotten away. And I see that the horse here is bowing down, and the horse is of the knight. This is Death's horse. The knight's horse hoof is jumping over, or not jumping, walking over a pile of poo. And this is a dog. We see the tail here. So when we read these details, why would you think that death, when your time is run out, the power of death will bow to this knight? Why would death bow to a Christian knight? Well, because when a Christian is dead, they believe that they aren't really going to die. What's going to happen to a Christian when they die? Well, the belief is you go to heaven, right? And heaven is a kingdom on the hill. So if you look at the very, very top here, you'll see a kingdom on a hill. And actually, if you had a microscope practically, right here is a teeny tiny branch with a little tiny goat on it that's jumping off the side. So why would Dürer put a goat jumping off the side of a mountain? Well, it's Lucifer. Lucifer, Satan was cast out of heaven. And so that's why the goat has been cast out of heaven. Now, I said that death's horse bows down because the good Christian will go to heaven. And then if you're the good Christian and you have the armor of God and the power of your beliefs, you will step over a lot of poop in life because you're just not going to step on it. You're just going to step past it. And the dog, if you think of man's best friend, loyalty, faithfulness. So the dog is loyal and faithful. So this shows his faithfulness to his God and his beliefs. That tail I pointed out is the tail of a lizard. And so when you have this tail of a lizard is like a low life, somebody who's snaky, somebody who's like moves around real quickly. You can't kind of like know where they are. And so it means like the low lives will run the other way because you're a person of character. And so nobody's going to mess with you. Nobody's going to mess with your character. So when you look at this and you understand that you've got this knight, and he's going through this really, really dark valley here. And he's got this evil looking creature. The 23rd Psalm, if you didn't get it on reading the page, is, right? Yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I shall fear no evil. Read the rest of it and see how it lines up. All right. Here is a painting by Jan van Eyck, and it's 1434. There's some debate about whether or not this was painted after the woman gave birth and died in childbirth. It was originally thought that this was like a witness painting, and back in the 1400s they might not have churches everywhere, so people would have a hand-holding ceremony that family and friends would witness and exchange rings. And in that hand-holding ceremony, people recognized that they were married, but then when the priest came through the town, they would see the witnesses that were at the hand-holding ceremony that everybody agreed that this couple was married, and the priest would bless the union then. So like you'd witness it. Well, what we're seeing here is not a kind of, trans guy, I don't think. This is really how they dressed back in the 1400s. And the man on the left is dressed that way because he's quite wealthy. And so he's got like a mink coat on, and he's showing that even in this cold climate, he can afford mink. And traditionally, people with big hats are important people. She's not pregnant because in the 1400s, you would never be married and pregnant and show it, because there was a big thing about you had to be married to be pregnant, right? If you were a woman. And so what she's doing is she's holding up her dress and kind of patting her stomach to show that she's going to give the promise of children. And so the green represents that promise to bear fruit or being fruitful, like in the spring, all this greenery, sprouts up. So she's going to be fertile. That's the green. But she's also going to be pure. And you would know this during the time because she was wearing blue. And blue is the color ascribed to the Virgin Mary because she's the Queen of Heaven. And white because she's pure. So you'll often see the Virgin Mary in Catholicism wearing a blue dress for the blue of heaven and a white robe or shawl to show her purity and her connection to God. We said in the other piece by Durr that a dog meant faithfulness, and here's a dog, and he represents faithfulness and loyalty. But do you see how he's facing her and coming towards her side? So she's promising to be faithful to him. Now there's 2 pairs of shoes in this piece. And if you look, it's pretty obvious. One is by the door and one is back here at the back of the room. And these are little red leather slippers, like little mules. And they're her slippers. They've been kind of tucked under the chair here. And the household is red. And so she's got red slippers because she belongs in the house. His slippers here look funny like this because back in the 1400s, they used chamber pots. They didn't have indoor bathrooms. So that is pot you used to do your stuff in, and they'd throw it out in the streets. So the streets just stunk. And so if you were wealthy and you had like really nice stockings, you'd wear these shoes that would allow you to step over the muck that was in the street. Often when people are in stockinged feet or shoeless, it means they're on sacred ground, that the shoes have been out in the real world and now they're on sacred ground, standing on sacred ground. Well, her fertility is very pronounced, but I notice behind him there's these little oranges, and they can be seen 2 ways. First, they're a fruit that you would not be able to get if somebody was dressed like this with all this mink on. They were cold. And how in the world do you get oranges in a cold place? Well, you have to be pretty wealthy back in the 1400s to import fruit that far for your household. But our attitudes about fertility change a bit. We think of it as a female thing. Look where the fruit is. Right there. Now that fruit could have been placed on the windowsill or anything. So it's the fruit of his loins. So she will bear the fruit of his loins. If you look really up here at this amazing, let me see if I can make it bigger for us, this amazing chandelier right here, you'll see that there's just one candle in it, and that's a unity candle. And even today, we have ceremonies where 2 couples will take 2 candles and light a single candle in a wedding. It's a unity candle to show that they burn together now. And so there's a unity candle on his side, meaning she's going to come in unity to his side. And then you see other things. This is a little brush for cleaning things up, and its handle is carved with Saint Bridget, who's the patron saint of childbirth. Well, then you get to this mirror. I mean, this mirror is maybe the size of a quarter, maybe. And there's 12 spokes on it, and inside each spoke is like the head of a pen painting of the passions of Christ. Christ as he goes through the stations of the cross to be crucified, to show that you have to make a sacrifice in marriage. And then you can see the window of the room reflected in the glass, and here's the man reflected, and here's the blue of the lady's dress and the white of her hat, her veil, and the red being reflected. And in the back of the painting here, way back, is the painter, Jan van Eyck, the painter painting himself, painting the painting in the center of the painting. So when you look at the painting, you see him painting the painting, but he's not in the painting. So I think that's kind of showing off, you know, but it's pretty cool. I did want to mention that this hairstyle, you might have noticed, looks like horns. You have to be careful that your interpretation of a word is accurate. The horns like this were considered like the horns of Moses. And sometimes when you see people who are enlightened, like Buddha has a bump on his head, and sometimes you'll see Moses with these kind of twirly pieces of hair coming out. Well, the idea is that when Moses descended from the mountain with the Ten Commandments, beams of light were coming out of his head. And since that doesn't happen quite often, there was some interpretation of it as horns of light, like a halo might be a horn of light. And so in some traditions, these twirly things that you see are like horns of light, being spiritually enlightened. So in this case, if this had been devil horns, she would have been, you know, drowned in the lake for witchcraft. So you have to be careful how you interpret these images, but it's kind of fun to know them. In this piece by Robert Campen, near the same time, you know, people will say, oh, maybe in the Middle Ages, people were illiterate. Well, they may have been text illiterate, but they were far more visually literate than you, and they could read these images like you might read a textbook. And so here we see the Annunciation. It's when the angel Gabriel announces to Mary that she's about ready to conceive Christ. And Mary doesn't know this yet. She's holding the Bible with this pure prayer cloth, and she's studying it, but it hasn't hit her yet. Gabriel has just landed. And we notice that in between the two of them, there's a table where some stuff is happening. Now, if I have a candle and it's a candle of light, or like the candle of a spirit or a life, one thing has just been snuffed out. Like at that moment, a wind has snuffed it out. And when you look at the book, a page is turning. Well, this is at this moment, the New Testament is being conceived, literally. And so the Old Testament will become the New Testament because of the fertility of Mary being conceived. See that bright spot and where it is on Mary's cloak? And in this case, Mary has does not yet have her blue robe on because she's not yet Queen of Heaven. She's wearing red because it's when Christ's blood, so the blood of the red of the blood. The candle can be taken several ways. One is that it is snuffing out the Old Testament for the new spirit of the New Testament, and it also snuffs out Satan. And so that candle goes out. The blue and white vase represents the vessel of Mary being pure and holy, and you'll see here the purity of the white and the blue heaven. And there's these lilies in it. And sometimes you might have seen around here that a daylily will open for one day and then close, and that's the only time that a daylily is open. So these are lilies that will signify that Mary will open to God and then close back up, thus still being a virgin. That touches here on this cloth that's important because these stripes make it a prayer cloth. And notice which side of the table they're on. Here, this side becomes the New Testament. This side becomes the Old Testament. So here's the prayer cloth right before the page turns on the Old Testament. And you'll see this temple-like, church-like niche in the wall, and there's this clean vessel, and it signifies that Mary was a pure vessel to receive God. And then as your eye wanders around, you see this very funny little shape here. And if you look really closely, there's a cross. So there's something about, being crucified or a cross here because Jesus hasn't even been born. Well, this is the fetus of Jesus. This is the sperm of God. Yeah, for us, it's a strange concept, but this is Jesus coming in to make on that little breeze to make that page turn to get into Mary's womb. And you'll notice that the fetus looks like that's carrying a predetermined cross. It looks like it's coming through this window. Well, the window even is significant because it's very important in the Catholic Church that Mary is a virgin. So how is it that she can conceive a child, give birth to a child, and remain a virgin? And so the explanation of the day was just as you have a pure glass and light, which is God, pierces the glass and enters into the water in the glass, so Mary was pierced by God as though she was a vessel of water and God was a beam of light coming in, or as though God came in through the window. It just goes right through the window without breaking it. And so this idea is that this beginning of Christ is coming through a window, and that's Mary's hymen to protect her virginity as it comes into here and shows where the birth is about to happen. So when we start looking at these images, we realize that the context, like the time period, is really important. And I'm going to have to go back smaller on my screen so you can see this one in its entirety. This one is called Rocket to the Moon by Romare Bearden. And notice it was made in 1971. So it's kind of at the height of the civil rights movement. And so it must have some relevance for today. Well, we might normally think of this cat as a bad luck, like black cat is bad luck. But back in the civil rights movements, a black cat would be the Black Panthers. Now notice that the cat is on top of this house as though this black cat, this Black Panther, is patrolling. Well, the Black Panthers patrolled their neighborhoods and protected them. And of course, they were in contrast to Martin Luther King, who went to the churches, and here's a church with a lady praying, and you see some women here. And Martin Luther King kind of preached civil disobedience. You just don't comply. Whereas the Black Panthers were by any means necessary and were patrolling neighborhoods, for example. They don't mention a whole lot that the Black Panthers also had food banks and fed children and had community daycare and really organized the community and were really very active in assisting the Black community so that they could be empowered. And he's getting his butt burned, but let's come down here first. We'll talk about this soon, rocket to the moon, right? So we know that's a rocket. Well, as I come down here into the houses and I kind of come down here, I see this open mouth as though people are talking inside. They're saying things inside in the building. But out here, I see all these people and they look all crowded and like bunched up and none of them are talking, and they are not smoking cigarettes because you don't smoke cigarettes that way. So they're getting high. And some of them have these double eyes. These double eyes. This is a collage he made from like street art stuff. And so, what's that about? Well, maybe in the 70s, you had two ways you had to see things. Mary Bearden is an African American artist. Like you had to see things the way society imposed on you, and then you had your like own way of seeing things, right? And then I see this stop and go back, like that blue arrow. If it was facing the other way, it would be like go forward, but it's going back. And so in a way, these people are in a pit. See this pathway that puts them in a pit like that? I mean, it's very intentional that the artist did that. So these people are down here in a pit getting high. Like, when I say, well, why would you get high? People would be like, well, like to escape problems, to relax and get rid of stress or whatever. So to, escape. Well, so they're getting high to escape. Meanwhile, they're stopped and held back. And then I see back here these glittering lights of like New York City, powerful and rich. And I also see this white rocket that looks kind of funny in the way it's doing this. And if anybody is thinking to themselves, well, they're smoking joints and that looks like a joint, you're actually seeing what's there, because rockets are a way to get high, right? Like a rocket gets high, it escapes the atmosphere. I mean, you get really high with the rocket, right? And so the rocket is burning the Black Panther's butt. So here's the moon. So when you put all this together, one possible critique could be that the rocket is white. During this time period, white culture, white scientists, white, people in power voted in to have money to put a rocket on the moon, but you couldn't take care of people who were poor or discrimination or segregation or people who were held back or who had bad jobs and minimum wage. All these problems that keep people in poverty and all of these problems of discrimination, you mean you can't address that? So the artist is saying, the Black Panthers are trying to take care of these people, and inside they're talking about the injustice of things, but they're down here trying to escape the poverty or lack of opportunities. Meanwhile, you got enough money to send a man to the moon, so why don't you have it together to solve racial problems or domestic problems? So one of the things about the context of this is, for apartheid, it might mean kind of a similar thing, but at another time and moment, it it wouldn't mean the same thing. You have to kind of capture the context. So if you know that he's African American and he's really committed to civil disobedience, and he's an activist, and he works with other writers of the time in the Spiral group, you kind of read the painting a little differently. And what I like is that during this time, if he said this stuff, conversation to somebody like you, there might be like anger or resentment, or it might lead to arguments, but he's saying it all and you can think what you want, and he's getting you to kind of think on this topic a bit, but it's done through the art. So like he says, more in his art, because he makes you like think about what you're looking at a little bit more. So you take a moment to do this, I bet you could pretty much get this. And so I'm going to just kind of quickly talk about it. I noticed that in a couple of other paintings that we looked at, that I'm seeing the same thing. And right now I can name 3 things that I've seen in the other artwork that 4 things that we've seen. 5 things. The more I look, there's more we see. Okay. Obviously the skull means death, and we saw it there is night, death, and the devil. So this is about death and a reflection on death. And then in the Kandinsky, the very first really abstract piece that we didn't really talk about much yet, that rainbow represents hope. It doesn't mean gay pride yet because we're in the 70s and the rainbow hasn't been associated with gay pride yet. So there's some hope in the reflection of death. And then we saw that time running out for death and night, death, and the devil. So right next to the skull is this death. And notice that in this hourglass, when you look at the color of the sand, you know, red is kind of like blood or anger or love. And so it's the color of life and passion. And notice that it's half empty. It's not all the way empty yet. And the candle we saw is a unity candle, but it can also be represent being as one, the spirit of one, right? And when we say, oh, you've been burning the candle at both ends, it means you've been like studying and working really hard and you're burnt out. So when a person's life is burnt out, where do we get that from? Oh, well, you were snuffed. Well, you snuff a candle. So as a candle burns out, so do you. So the candle has the color of life. And I noticed that the candle is burning still, but it's really, really low. Now, if I start looking further, it's called the Wheel of Fortune, and this is a Wheel of Fortune, and it's on a tarot card. And I'll leave it to you to look closer to the tarot card, but that's about, you know, asking about what your chances are, asking about your future or your fortune. This picture is where you normally might start, because when we read from left to right. We're taught to read a page that way. So if our eye doesn't know where to go, it'll automatically go in the upper left-hand corner like you're reading text. So this is the artist's daughter. And when you come across here, these grapes, see how lush and fruitful they are? So this represents like youth and being like ripe and juicy and bursting with energy. And then we come to over here and there's a gazing ball. That's one of those like mirrored balls that you might put in a garden. And you kind of look at yourself when you're young and you don't really know what you see yet. And you come down here and you see this lipstick. Well, it would make a difference if it was a pink lipstick. Then it seems kind of girly. But there's, guys, I'll tell you, if a girl puts on this color of lipstick, yeah, go ahead and talk to her, okay? I'm just teasing. Red lipstick kind of indicates a sexual maturity. You know, a woman in red lipstick is kind of a sexier. And so this idea that the lipstick is out represents a sexual maturity. And then this right here is a glass of red wine. And you can see that on the red wine, it's half empty. So the flow kind of brings you down here. Now you might think of wine as the grapes maturing into wine because it takes time for the grapes to turn into wine. Some of you who have different backgrounds may see this as communion, like the blood of Christ, so you become more spiritual. Then your eye kind of slides down this blue veil. Well, remember I said that blue was the color of heaven, and like Mary's dress, she's the queen of heaven, so it's blue. This is like pulling back the veil of life. So that cloth is, in traditional terms, pulling back the veil of life, because we're all kind of like actors on a stage acting out our life. And when the veil of heaven opens up, or the veil of the sky opens up, it means you're stepping into the afterlife, or your veil is being drawn and the curtain is being drawn and your act is about ready to be over. So this is the veil of heaven. Now as I come down here, I see this kind of old lady-ish looking vanity stuff, and it's like powder puffs and this little tiny peering mirror, you know, and some of the grapes have fallen down, but they're still okay, lush, but there is this kind of vanity setting in. and it represented by the cosmetics. And there's nothing in the reflection. Like when you look in the mirror, you don't really see yourself. And you come across here, and the crystal necklace represents wealth, okay? So like in a life, you're going after all these riches and you're trying to accumulate wealth, and you're kind of burnt out trying to accumulate all this wealth. And the time goes by, and down here's a die, as in dice, but one. And the die is kind of rolling. It's not even set. So when you think of rolling the dice, this is like the chances you take in life, that life is a gamble. And this lime represents being bitter or sour about your life. And the calendar definitely indicates that there's a time that's coming up. You know, like in the movies, the calendar pages fly by and its time is flying by. And yet when she looks in the mirror, there's some hope in the afterlife. So if you could read this with me, you're doing really well on your visual literacy. And I'm going to go to the next page about vanitas and memento mori, and I'll see you there. Bye.